My name is Ruby, I'm 35 years old, and I thought I had finally found my happy ending. After raising my daughter Emma alone for 7 years, working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, I believed I'd met the man who would complete our little family. James seemed perfect. He read bedtime stories to Emma, helped with her homework, and made me feel like I deserved love again. Our wedding day was supposed to be the beginning of everything I dreamed of. But sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us deepest, and what happened next would teach me the most important lesson of my life. Before I tell you what happened on what should have been the happiest day of my life, please let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you've ever felt like you finally found happiness, only to have it shattered. And don't forget to subscribe because this story will show you that sometimes the worst moments reveal our greatest strength. Let me take you back to where it all started. 7 years ago, my world fell apart when my ex-husband walked out on Emma and me. She was only 3 years old, asking why Daddy didn't come home anymore. I had no choice but to become both mother and father, working as a sales associate during the day and waiting tables at a local bar 3 nights a week. Those early years were brutal. I'd come home exhausted, my feet aching from standing all day only to help Emma with dinner and bath time. Some nights after tucking her into bed, I'd sit on my kitchen floor and cry from the overwhelming weight of it all. The bills kept coming, daycare costs were crushing, and I had no family nearby to help. The hardest moments came when Emma would ask innocent questions like, "Mommy, why don't I have a daddy like other kids?" My heart would break into 1,000 pieces, but I'd smile and tell her we were a team, just the 2 of us. Still, I worried constantly about what I couldn't give her, about the father figure missing from her life. Then on a quiet Saturday afternoon, 18 months ago, everything changed. I was working my weekend job at the local bookstore when this tall, gentle-looking man approached the children's section. He had kind brown eyes and was carefully selecting picture books, reading the back covers with genuine interest. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I'm looking for something for a 7-year-old who's just learning to read chapter books. Any recommendations?" That's how I met James Morrison. He was 38, a software engineer who'd been divorced for 2 years. He explained he was buying books for his nephew's birthday, and we spent 20 minutes discussing children's literature. There was something immediately calming about him, the way he listened intently and asked thoughtful questions. A week later, he came back. This time, he didn't need book recommendations. He asked if I'd like to grab coffee after my shift. Our first date was a simple picnic in Riverside Park. James brought sandwiches, and to my surprise, a small bag of gummy bears for Emma. He'd remembered I mentioned her favorite candy. Watching James interact with my daughter was magical. He got down on her level, asked about her drawings, and genuinely listened to her 6-year-old stories about school. Emma, who was usually shy around strangers, immediately warmed up to him. Within a month, she was calling him Uncle James and asking when he'd visit again. James never made me feel like a burden for having a child. Instead, he embraced our package deal wholeheartedly. He attended Emma's school plays, helped fix her broken bike, and slowly became the father figure she'd never had. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't carrying the world alone. After 6 months of dating, James started staying overnight occasionally. Emma would wake up to him making pancakes, and the joy on her face was everything I'd hoped to give her. He never overstepped as a parent, but he provided stability and male guidance that enriched our lives immeasurably. When James proposed 18 months later, right there in the bookstore, where we'd met, Emma was more excited than I was. "Mommy, does this mean Uncle James will be my daddy forever?" she whispered loudly as I said yes through tears of happiness. James knelt down and promised Emma he'd always be there for both of us. I finally believed our struggling days were over. Planning our wedding was supposed to be pure joy, but looking back, that's when the first cracks appeared in what I thought was our perfect relationship. We decided on a small ceremony at St. Mary's Church, nothing fancy, just 80 close friends and family members. I'd been saving money for months, planning to make my own dress to keep costs down. James was supportive of our budget-conscious approach, often saying he just wanted to marry me, that all the details didn't matter. Emma was thrilled about being our flower girl, practicing her walk down the aisle every evening in our living room. Everything felt perfect and within reach. But during the week leading up to our wedding, James started acting differently. I first noticed it on a Tuesday evening when his phone buzzed during dinner. He glanced at the message and quickly flipped the phone face down, something he'd never done before. When I casually asked who it was, he said it was just work, but his voice had an edge to it. The next few days brought more mysterious phone calls. James would step outside to answer, claiming they were related to work projects. I found text messages from someone saved in his phone as just S asking about wedding details. When I asked about it, James explained it was Sarah, a colleague from his old company who might attend. Sarah Peterson, he said, not meeting my eyes. We worked together for 3 years. She's just checking if she can bring a +1. The explanation seemed reasonable, but something about his body language felt off. James had never been secretive about his friendships before. Then came the request to invite additional guests. Honey, I know we planned for 80 people, but there are a few friends from college I'd really like to include. They're important to me, and I think they should be there for this milestone. James seemed unusually insistent about this, mentioning Sarah specifically as someone who'd played a significant role in his life. I agreed, of course. I wanted James to feel surrounded by people who mattered to him. But when Sarah called our home phone Thursday night, asking specific questions about the reception venue and whether there would be dancing, I felt my first real twinge of unease. James took the call in another room, and I could hear him laughing in a way that seemed too intimate for a casual work friendship. Who exactly is Sarah to you? I asked after he hung up. James paused longer than necessary before answering. She's someone I knew really well in college. We stayed in touch professionally. She's just excited to see me get married. Something about the way he said "knew really well" sent a chill down my spine, but I pushed the feeling aside. The night before our wedding, James was visibly agitated. He kept checking his phone and muttering about unfinished business he needed to handle before the ceremony. When I tried to comfort him, assuming he was just nervous about getting married, he pulled away slightly. Ruby, there are things about my past that I never fully resolved, he said cryptically. After tomorrow, everything will be different, and I need to make peace with some decisions I made years ago. I thought he was talking about typical pre-wedding jitters, maybe regrets about his first marriage or concerns about becoming a stepfather. I reassured him that we'd face whatever challenges came together, that Emma and I were lucky to have him. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. On our wedding morning, James left early to handle some last-minute details, alone. This struck me as odd, since we'd already confirmed everything with the caterers and florist. When I called to check on him, he seemed rushed and distracted, saying he'd see me at the church. As I got ready with my mother's help, Emma bouncing around in her flower girl dress, I tried to shake off the growing anxiety. You look like a princess, Mommy, Emma said, and her pure joy helped calm my nerves. I convinced myself that James was just overwhelmed by the big day, that once we exchanged vows, everything would return to normal. The morning of our wedding dawned bright and clear, exactly what I'd hoped for. Emma woke up singing, thrilled that her big day as flower girl had finally arrived. My mother came over early to help with final preparations, and our small house buzzed with excited energy. Are you nervous, sweetheart? Mom asked as she helped zip up my simple but elegant white dress. I'd found it on sale and altered it myself, adding delicate pearl buttons down the back. Looking in the mirror, I felt beautiful and hopeful, ready to start this new chapter. Just excited, I told her truthfully. Despite the odd moments during wedding week, I was focused on the joy ahead. James and I would finally be husband and wife, and Emma would have the loving father she deserved. We arrived at St. Mary's 30 minutes early, and that's when I saw her. A stunning blonde woman in a striking red dress sat in the third pew on the groom's side, despite the fact that immediate family was supposed to occupy the front rows. She wore expensive-looking jewelry and had an air of confidence that commanded attention. Who's the woman in red? My friend Lisa whispered as we walked past. I shook my head, genuinely confused. James had given me a list of his invited guests, and I'd memorized every name to be a good hostess. This woman wasn't on that list, and she certainly wasn't someone I'd ever met. The woman seemed completely comfortable checking her phone and occasionally glancing toward the altar with what looked like anticipation. Her dress was more appropriate for a cocktail party than a church wedding, and something about her presence felt deliberately attention-grabbing. James arrived 20 minutes late, which was unlike him. He was usually punctual to a fault, often arriving early for important events. When he finally appeared at the altar, looking handsome in his navy suit, I noticed his eyes immediately scan the congregation until they landed on the blonde woman. She gave him a small wave, and he nodded almost imperceptibly in return. During our ceremony, I tried to focus on the beautiful moment we were sharing. Father Williams spoke about commitment and trust, about building a life together based on honesty and mutual respect. James read his vows about cherishing and protecting our family, promising to be the husband and father we deserved. but I couldn't shake the feeling that his attention kept drifting to that third pew. When we exchanged rings, James's hands were trembling slightly, which I attributed to normal wedding nerves. "I love you," he whispered as we kissed for the first time. As husband and wife, and I felt a surge of happiness. Whatever doubts I'd had seemed silly in that sacred moment. After the ceremony, as we posed for photos on the church steps, I noticed James having an intense conversation with the blonde woman near the parking lot. Emma tugged on my dress, asking, "Mommy, why is Daddy James talking to that pretty lady so much? Shouldn't he be taking pictures with us?" My stomach clenched. Emma was right. James should have been by my side celebrating with his new family, not having what appeared to be a serious discussion with a mystery guest. When I started walking toward them, they immediately separated. "Ruby," James said, his voice sounding forced. "I'd like you to meet Sarah Peterson. Sarah, this is my wife Ruby, and my stepdaughter Emma." Sarah extended a perfectly manicured hand, her smile not quite reaching her ice blue eyes. "Congratulations, Ruby. James has told me so much about you." There was something in her tone, a subtle emphasis on certain words that made me feel like I was missing crucial information. "Nice to meet you," I replied, studying her face for clues about her significance. "James mentioned you were colleagues." "Something like that," Sarah said with an enigmatic smile. "We have quite a history together. I wouldn't have missed this day for the world." The way she said history sent warning bells through my mind, but there was no time to process it fully. Our photographer was calling for more family shots, and guests were heading to their cars for the short drive to our reception venue. As we rode to the Oak Grove Community Center, James was quieter than usual. Emma chattered excitedly about how beautiful the ceremony was, but James seemed lost in thought, occasionally checking his phone. I reached over to take his hand, and he squeezed mine briefly before looking out the window. "Everything okay?" I asked softly. "Just thinking about how much everything is changing," he replied, which seemed like a normal sentiment for a groom on his wedding day. But something about his tone suggested deeper meaning layers I wasn't privy to understanding. The Oak Grove Community Center had been transformed into a charming reception venue with white tablecloths, strings of warm lights, and centerpieces of baby's breath and roses. Emma immediately ran to the children's table, delighted to see her young cousins and friends. The atmosphere should have been perfect for celebrating our new beginning. I changed from my ceremony dress into a simpler white cocktail dress for easier dancing and mingling. James looked handsome and relaxed as he greeted guests, and I started to feel like my earlier concerns were just pre-wedding anxiety finally fading away. Dinner proceeded smoothly. James sat beside me at our sweetheart table, and we smiled for photos while cutting our simple two-tier cake. Emma giggled as she fed me a bite of chocolate frosting, and for a while, everything felt exactly as I dreamed it would. But I couldn't help noticing Sarah's table placement. She'd somehow ended up at table 4, which was reserved for James's close friends and important colleagues. She seemed to know everyone around her, laughing and chatting as if she belonged in his inner circle. When I mentioned this to James, he explained that his friend Michael had invited her as his +1. "I thought you said she was coming alone," I said, confused. "Plans changed," James replied quickly, taking a large sip of wine. "Michael's been divorced for 6 months. Sarah offered to be his date so he wouldn't feel awkward at a wedding." The explanation made sense, but I'd noticed Michael talking to several single women throughout the evening. He didn't seem to need Sarah's company, and she certainly wasn't paying much attention to him. During dinner, I caught fragments of Sarah's conversation with the people around her. At one point, I distinctly heard her say to James's cousin, "I can't believe he actually went through with it." When I turned to look, she was cutting her salmon with deliberate precision, acting as if she hadn't spoken. As the meal concluded and guests began moving to the dance floor, James stood up with his wine glass. This was the moment for his traditional groom's speech, something we'd discussed briefly, but that he'd said he wanted to keep spontaneous and from the heart. "Thank you all for being here on this special day," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "Ruby is a wonderful woman who has shown me what true strength looks like. She's raised an amazing daughter, built a life through sheer determination, and somehow found room in her heart to love again." I felt tears of happiness welling up. This was the James I'd fallen in love with, the man who saw and appreciated my struggles, who understood what I'd overcome to create a good life for Emma and myself. "Before we have our first dance," James continued, and I prepared to stand and join him, "I want to acknowledge someone very special who's here tonight." My heart swelled, thinking he was about to recognize Emma or perhaps my mother, both of whom had been crucial to this day happening. There's someone here tonight who taught me what real love feels like long before I met Ruby. The room went completely silent. I felt my blood turn to ice as the implications of his words began to sink in. This wasn't going to be about Emma or my mother. James wasn't looking at our family table. His eyes were fixed directly on Sarah, who was slowly standing up with a smile that I now realized wasn't celebratory, but triumphant. "Sarah," James said, his voice filled with an emotion I'd never heard him use when speaking about me, "would you honor me with a dance for old time's sake?" The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I watched my new husband publicly ask another woman to dance at our wedding reception. Sarah moved toward the dance floor like she'd been expecting this invitation all along. I sat frozen in my chair, unable to process what was happening, unable to understand how the man I'd just married could be humiliating me in front of everyone we knew and loved. The band, clearly confused by this departure from normal wedding protocol, started playing "The Way You Look Tonight," which James had once told me was our song. Hearing those familiar notes as he took another woman in his arms felt like a physical blow to my chest. James held Sarah close, far closer than appropriate for a casual dance between old friends. She rested her head against his shoulder like she belonged there, like this was the most natural thing in the world. They moved together with a familiarity that spoke of intimate history, of muscle memory, and shared moments I knew nothing about. The wedding guests sat in stunned silence. Some looked away uncomfortably, others whispered among themselves, and a few shook their heads in obvious disapproval. My mother half rose from her chair, her face flushed with anger before sitting back down and looking at me with heartbreak in her eyes. Emma appeared at my side, having left the children's table when she sensed something was wrong. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice small and confused. "Why is Daddy James dancing with that lady? Shouldn't he dance with you first? That's what happens in all the movies." I wrapped my arms around my daughter, trying to shield her from the adult cruelty unfolding in front of us, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices, sweetheart," I managed to say. "But you and I are going to be just fine." On the dance floor, James and Sarah were completely absorbed in each other. He whispered something in her ear that made her laugh softly, intimately. When she pulled back to look at him, their faces were inches apart, and the expression in his eyes was one I'd seen directed at me during our most romantic moments. My friend Lisa approached our table, her jaw tight with fury. "Ruby, do you want me to stop this? Because I will march over there and drag him off that dance floor right now." "No," I said quietly, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "Let him finish. I want everyone here to see exactly who he really is." Several guests had already gathered their things and left, clearly unwilling to witness this public betrayal. I didn't blame them. If I'd been a guest at someone else's wedding and watched the groom dance intimately with another woman, I would have been mortified and angry on the bride's behalf. The song felt like it lasted forever, but finally, mercifully, it ended. James and Sarah separated slowly, reluctantly. He kissed her cheek in a way that lingered far longer than any casual goodbye, and she touched his face briefly before they walked back toward the tables. James approached me with what I can only describe as audacious confidence. There was no shame in his expression, no acknowledgement that he'd just committed an unforgivable act of public humiliation. "Thank you for understanding, honey," he said casually, as if he'd just stepped outside to take a phone call. Sarah and I needed closure. Closure. The word hit me like a slap. This wasn't about friendship or nostalgia. This was about unfinished romantic business that my husband had decided to resolve at our wedding reception. Sarah joined us at our table, her red dress now seeming even more boldly inappropriate. "I hope you don't mind, Ruby," she said with fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. "James and I have such history together. It felt important to honor that before you two started your new life." "History." I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of history?" Sarah's smile widened, and I realized this moment was exactly what she'd been anticipating all evening. "We dated for 5 years, she said slowly, watching my face for reaction. "James was supposed to propose to me before he met you. We had plans, a whole future mapped out. But then life took us in different directions." James stood beside her, not contradicting a single word, not rushing to reassure me or minimize their relationship. His silence was as damning as any confession. "In fact," Sarah continued, clearly enjoying every second of my growing understanding, "when James called me last month to invite me to the wedding, we spent hours talking about what might have been. Amazing how some feelings never really go away, isn't it? I stood completely still for what felt like an eternity, processing everything I'd just learned. The mysterious phone calls, the secretive behavior, the late arrival at our own ceremony. All of it suddenly made perfect, horrible sense. Around me, the remaining wedding guests watched with a mixture of sympathy and fascination, waiting to see how I would respond to this unprecedented situation. Emma was still pressed against my side, her small hand clutching my dress. I could feel her confusion and fear, and that more than anything else galvanized me into action. My daughter was watching how I handled this crisis, and I refused to model weakness or acceptance of disrespect. I gently guided Emma toward my mother. "Sweetheart, can you go sit with Grandma for just a few minutes? Mommy needs to talk to the grown-ups." My mother immediately understood, wrapping Emma in a protective embrace while shooting daggers at James with her eyes. "Come here, baby girl. Let's go get some more cake while Mommy handles some business." With Emma safe, I walked slowly to the microphone that James had used for his speech. The band stopped playing and every conversation in the room ceased. The silence was complete and heavy with anticipation. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. I was surprised by how steady I sounded, how in control I felt despite my world crumbling around me. "I have something important to say." I could see James out of the corner of my eye finally starting to look concerned, as if he was just now realizing that actions have consequences. "I've just learned some very interesting information about my new husband." I continued, allowing a note of steel to enter my voice. Apparently, while I was planning our wedding, choosing flowers, and writing vows, James was rekindling an old romance. A murmur rippled through the remaining guests. James took a step forward as if to interrupt, but I held up my hand to stop him. "James, you said you and Sarah needed closure. Well, I'm going to give you all the closure you could possibly want." I reached for my wedding ring, the simple gold band we'd chosen together just 2 months ago. With deliberate slowness, I slid it off my finger and held it up so everyone could see. "This marriage is over, effective immediately." I placed the ring on the nearest table with a definitive clink that seemed to echo through the silent room. "To our guests, thank you for witnessing what real love should not look like," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "A real man doesn't humiliate his wife on their wedding day. A real man doesn't dance with his ex-girlfriend before dancing with his bride. And a real man certainly doesn't marry someone while still being in love with someone else." The room erupted in applause. My friends and family, who had been sitting in shocked silence, began clapping loudly. Even some of James's relatives joined in, clearly appalled by his behavior. I turned to face Sarah directly. "Congratulations, Sarah, you can have him. But let me warn you about something: a man who would betray someone on their wedding day isn't exactly relationship material. If he cheats with you, he'll cheat on you." Sarah's confident smirk faltered slightly. She clearly hadn't expected me to fight back with such composure. "I spent 7 years raising my daughter alone," I continued, my voice ringing with conviction. "Working 2 jobs, struggling to make ends meet, but building a life based on honesty and integrity. I'd rather spend 70 more years alone than waste 1 more day with a man who doesn't respect me enough to be faithful on our wedding day." The applause grew louder. I could see people nodding in agreement, and several women were wiping away tears. James finally found his voice. "Ruby, wait," he said desperately, stepping toward the microphone. "You're misunderstanding the situation. Sarah and I are just friends. That dance didn't mean anything." I looked at him with the same expression I'd give Emma when she tried to convince me she hadn't eaten cookies before dinner, despite chocolate on her face. "James, please don't insult my intelligence any further," I said calmly. "Your girlfriend just told me you dated for 5 years and that you called her last month for hours-long conversations about your feelings. That doesn't sound like just friends to me." "She's not my girlfriend," he protested, but his face was red and his voice cracked slightly. "You're right," I agreed. "She's not your girlfriend, she's your ex-girlfriend who you're still in love with. Which makes the situation even worse, because it means you married me knowing you had unresolved feelings for someone else." I stepped closer to the microphone for my final words. "The only thing I misunderstood, James, was thinking you were a good man. Thank you for showing me your true character before we wasted any more time together." I walked back to Emma and took her hand. "Come on, baby," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "We're going home, just the 2 of us like always." As we headed toward the exit, the applause followed us. People reached out to touch my arm supportively or whispered words of encouragement. My mother grabbed my bouquet and purse, falling into step beside us. Behind us, I could hear James calling my name, but I never turned around. Emma looked up at me with worried eyes. "Are we going to be okay, Mommy?" "We're going to be better than okay, sweetheart," I told her with absolute certainty. "We're going to be free." The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching my emotional state. As I sat in my kitchen, still wearing yesterday's makeup, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Emma was still sleeping, exhausted from the emotional upheaval of the previous day, and I was grateful for the quiet time to process everything that had happened. My phone had been ringing constantly since 6 in the morning, friends calling to check on me, family members wanting to offer support, and several calls from James that I let go straight to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear whatever excuses or explanations he might offer. By noon, I'd gathered enough energy to start collecting James's belongings from around our house. His coffee mug in the sink, his favorite sweater draped over the couch, the book he'd been reading on the nightstand. Each item felt like evidence of how thoroughly I'd been deceived, how completely I'd misjudged his character. Emma woke up around 1 o'clock, padding into the kitchen in her pajamas with messy hair and confused eyes. "Mommy, is James coming back? Did we really get unmarried yesterday?" I knelt down to her level, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes adults make really bad decisions, baby girl. James chose to hurt our family, and that means he can't live with us anymore. But you and I are going to be perfectly fine, just like we were before he came along." "Will I still see him sometimes?" she asked, and my heart broke for her. In one day, she'd lost the closest thing to a father she'd ever known. "I don't think so, sweetheart. But that's James's choice, not ours. We're going to focus on taking care of each other and being happy." Emma considered this seriously, then nodded. "Okay, Mommy, can we have pancakes for lunch?" Her resilience amazed me. At 7 years old, she was already adapting to this new reality with more grace than many adults could manage. 2 weeks later, I met with a lawyer who confirmed what I'd suspected: the marriage could be annulled on grounds of fraud. James had deliberately concealed his ongoing emotional relationship with Sarah, which constituted a fundamental deception that invalidated our vows. The legal process was surprisingly straightforward. James didn't contest the annulment, perhaps because he knew he had no defensible position. During our one required court appearance, he looked genuinely remorseful, but it was too late for apologies. A month after the wedding, that wasn't. I heard through mutual friends that James and Sarah had already broken up. Apparently, once Sarah had succeeded in destroying my marriage, she lost interest in James entirely. She'd been motivated by jealousy and spite, not genuine love, and their rekindled romance lasted exactly 3 weeks. I felt no satisfaction in learning this news. If anything, it made James's betrayal seem even more pointless. He'd destroyed our family and broken Emma's heart for a relationship that was doomed from the start. But as the months passed, I began to see James's betrayal as the best thing that could have happened to me. Not because I enjoyed being hurt, but because it revealed his true character before we'd built an even deeper life together. Imagine if I'd discovered his capacity for deception after we'd had children together or bought a house. 6 months after the annulment, I made a decision that changed everything. Using the money I'd saved for our honeymoon and some funds from my grandmother's inheritance, I bought a small building on Main Street and opened my own bookstore. Ruby's Reading Corner became exactly what I'd dreamed of: a cozy space filled with carefully chosen books, comfortable reading chairs, and a children's section where Emma could do her homework after school. The store gave us financial independence and a sense of purpose I'd never experienced working for other people. Emma thrived in this new environment. She became my unofficial junior librarian, helping customers find books and charming everyone with her enthusiasm for reading. Watching her confidence grow in our own space was incredibly rewarding. A year later, I met David Chen at a single-parent support group that met monthly at the community center. He was a widowed father of 2 young boys, still grieving his wife's death from cancer, but trying to rebuild a life for his children. Our friendship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of what it meant to put children first. David never tried to rush our relationship or push for commitments I wasn't ready to make. He understood that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. When Emma started calling him Mr. David, and his boys began asking when they could have play dates at our bookstore, I knew this connection was different from what I'd had with James. This time, there were no secrets, no mysterious phone calls, no unexplained absences. David's life was an open book, and he encouraged me to verify anything I wondered about. After James's deception, this transparency felt like a precious gift. But more importantly, David never made me feel like I needed rescuing. He appreciated my strength, my independence, and my fierce protectiveness of Emma. He didn't want to complete me. He wanted to complement the life I'd already built. The most powerful lesson I learned from that disastrous wedding day was this: sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing that ever happens to you. James's betrayal taught me that I don't need a man to validate my worth or complete my family. Emma and I were already whole, already strong, already enough. Any relationship that adds to our lives should enhance our happiness, not define it. Today, 3 years after that humiliating wedding day, Emma and I are thriving beyond anything I could have imagined. Our bookstore is profitable and beloved in the community. Emma, now 10, is confident, intelligent, and surrounded by people who genuinely care about her well-being. David and I are taking our relationship slowly, building something real and lasting based on honesty, respect, and shared values. His boys have become like brothers to Emma, and our blended friendship feels natural and right. But most importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts again. The red flags I ignored with James, the gut feelings I dismissed in favor of wishful thinking, I now recognize as valuable warnings that deserve attention. That day taught me that my daughter and I don't need saving. We need celebrating. We don't need someone to rescue us from our life. We need someone who appreciates the life we've built and wants to be part of it. Sometimes the most beautiful thing about hitting rock bottom is discovering that you have everything you need to climb back up. And sometimes the person who breaks your heart gives you exactly what you need to build something better. The morning after that wedding, I thought my life was over. I had no idea it was just beginning. I want to leave you with this thought: never accept treatment that diminishes your worth, no matter how much you love someone. Real love lifts you up. It doesn't tear you down in front of the people who matter most to you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a moment that felt like the end of the world, but turned out to be the beginning of your real life? Have you experienced a betrayal that ultimately led you to something better? I'd love to hear your stories of strength and resilience. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better. Subscribe to this channel for more real stories about overcoming life's challenges and discovering your own strength. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, you are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and more valuable than you know. Take care of yourselves and never settle for less than you deserve.